Thank you guys. I'm psyched to be here. I hope I could infect you with some of my passion and enthusiasm for neuroscience today. And I want to show you some of my work and why I think there's a lot more that needs to be done in neuroscience. I'm probably one of the least formal people you've ever met. So if you have any questions, if you wanted to challenge anything I said, if you just want to talk shit, I'm up for it, okay? So please feel free to disturb me. So the research topic that I'm interested in is technically called brain reorganization. It is the brain's ability to reassign resources based on changes in demand. So let's think of an area that has been carefully organized through evolution, been hardwired through genetic coding to do a very specific thing. Let's say to process information relating to someone's hand. What's going to happen to this brain area if the main input is now lost, let's say because you lost your arm to amputation? Would this area be able to start doing something else, something that is more useful for the amputee than just continuing to represent the body part that is no longer there? So this is the aim with brain reorganization, and if we as neuroscientists could harness this incredible process that we call brain reorganization, we could really provide a powerful tool to better society, to improve well-being. So it's actually a pretty exciting vision for us. But unfortunately, at least based on the textbook, we think that brain reorganization is actually quite restricted and limited in the adult human brain. And we only really see reorganization happening spontaneously under very extreme sets of circumstances, of changes in demand. And the model that I've been studying in that respect is what happens to the brain if you lose one hand. Amputation provides a fantastic model for trying to understand the possibilities for brain reorganization. And this is because we have known since the dawn of neuroscience that there are areas in the brain that would specifically represent different body parts. So this is the famous sensory motor homunculus that you may have met before in textbooks. And here you can see a caricature of how different body parts are placed, represented in the brain. And as you can see in this caricature, the hand actually benefits from some serious prime real estate in the brain. It's right in the middle of this sensory motor strip, and it has lots of useful connections. And the question that I'm trying to answer in my research is what happens in this area. And it's an easy question in some respects because we have a very good clue of where this brain area is in a typical brain. So it sits in this little nook here that we call the hand mouth. So with neuroimaging, I can quite easily point at the area where I bet the hand should have been represented. And my vision or whatever is guiding me in those difficult evenings in the lab when things don't work so well is that if we could really understand how this works, we could potentially provide amputees with superpowers, right? So we'll give them this extra brain power processing to do whatever it is that they need to do in order to get back to their routine after amputation. But unfortunately, if you read the textbook, you would learn that this process of brain reorganization is actually harmful for amputees. And the idea came about based on the idea that when you change the brain, you're actually going to cause people phantom pain. So I'm sure you all have heard of phantom pain, reading about it in magazines and TV. I want to give you a first-hand perspective of what it's like to suffer from phantom pain. So of course, I can't give you that description. Instead, I'll show you a short clip featuring one of my participants, Lynne.
Lynne Ledger verloor door kanker haar arm. Ze heeft veel last van fantoompijn.
I can feel the entirety of my phantom arm. To anyone looking at me, I have no arm. But I can feel the whole thing. I can feel the elbow, wrists, fingers. Imagine you're wearing an elbow-length evening glove. So it comes up to just above your elbow and you've had the tips of the fingers cut off. Everywhere that glove touches your skin, it's crushing your arm. So the ends of your fingers are bulbing out. It's crushing constantly. And then on top of that, you get pains like shooting electricity, you get burning pains like when you burn yourself on a grill, your instinct is to pull your hand away. With these pains, you can't pull your hand away, so it's like keeping it there. It's a nerve sensation, and it simply stays there until it decides to go away.
So phantom pain is a very common predicament. 4 out of 5 people who lost their arm will have to struggle with phantom pain. How did we came about to the idea that brain reorganization gives people phantom pain? Well, historically, things started getting interesting in the early 90s, where experimenters tried to understand what happens to the territory of the hand if you remove its main input through something similar to an amputation. And what they found is that the cells, the neurons that sit in this brain area, if you wait a while, and they waited a while, they waited 10 years, start responding, start becoming active when you touch the monkey's lower part of the face. And it's a mysterious phenomenon, but if you think about brain organization, it starts making sense, because if you remember, I've shown you before that the cortical neighbor of the hand is actually the face. So the idea is that if this area becomes free from its main input, available for recruitment, it's going to be taken over by the neighboring representation, predominantly the face. So based on this idea that the territory doesn't just stay unemployed, it gets taken over to do something for another body part representation, which is the neighboring representation, scientists in Germany wanted to see what happens to the representation of the face of people who lost one hand. And we're talking about mid-90s. The techniques at the time were quite crude. And what they were trying to see is what happens in the representation in the brain if we touch an amputee in the face in both sides. And it's important to remember that if I would touch you, for example, in the right side of the face or with the right hand, the representation would be in the opposite hemisphere, in the left, and vice versa. So they're going to touch the amputees in both sides of the face, and they're going to look at the representations across the two hemispheres. And some participants, like the one that we see here in white, showed that the representation of the face, well, the estimated representation, was pretty much similar across the two hemispheres. That means that there's not much reorganization going on. The representation of the lips is in the lip area. But for other people, like the one you see here in black, the representation is one side, and this happens to be the hemisphere opposite to the missing hand, so where things should be happening, the representation is shifted in one side compared to the other, and it is shifted in this direction, so from the face representation towards the hand representation. And these shifts are represented here with spikes. So little spike is someone like this white guy, he doesn't really show reorganization. Big spike is this black guy, lots of reorganization, lots of changes. And the really interesting finding was not that different people have different capacity for reorganization, but that the amount of reorganization scales pretty much perfectly with these spikes here, which actually represent how much pain people were reporting to suffer from at the course of the study. So people who suffer from worse phantom pain, so have this pain coming from the body part that is no longer there, are those people who show more striking reorganization. So based on this correlation, a very prominent theory came forward. We call it the maladaptive plasticity model for explaining phantom pain. Based on this idea, if you lose an input, let's say to the hand area, this is going to trigger brain reorganization, where the representation of the face takes over the hand territory. Now, this is going to create some mismatch, because obviously the area was originally wired to be a hand area, but now it's starting to receive inputs from the face. And based on this theory, this mismatch is going to be giving an error signal to the brain, and the error signal would be perceived to the individual as pain. What kind of pain? Pain coming from here, which is the hand area, right? So the idea is that reorganization actually ends up giving you the sense of pain coming from your missing hand. This theory was extremely potent, not only in neuroscience, but also in clinical circuits. And in fact, one of the best things about this theory is that it provides us very clear guidelines how we should fight phantom pain. All we have to do is get rid of this maladaptive brain reorganization. So what we want to do is push back the face to its original area, and the best way probably to do that is reinstate here the representation of the missing hand. And this gave rise to these very famous treatments, the mirror box treatments, but that I'm sure many of you have heard of. And the idea really follows the theory. So we're going to present to an amputee the reflected image of their intact hand through a mirror. So it looks like the hand that is no longer there is actually physically there. And the idea is that by providing this illusory visual information, we're tricking the brain. We're tricking the brain to think that the hand is there, and this should result in reductions in the representation of the face from the hand area. So this is the theory. There are many things I don't like about this theory, but I was asked to be nice today. So I'm going to shower you with data to demonstrate what are my issues with this theory. Before I show you my beautiful data, I need to get some terms out of the way so we can all speak with the same language. Most of the results I'll show you today are from what I call acquired amputees. These are people that used to have two hands, but they lost one, predominantly due to trauma. They still have one hand, that's their intact hand, and whatever is left from the amputation I'm going to refer to as the residual arm. These people have phantom sensations. Almost every single one of them has phantom sensations. So they feel the hand even though it's not there. And these sensations don't have to be painful. It can just be the presence of the hand. And it's not necessarily unpleasant, but unfortunately, these sensations are awful and are quite unpleasant and can be debilitating. So it can be excruciating. And when they're uncomfortable, when they're painful, I'm referring to them as phantom pain. Later on in the talk, I'm going to talk about congenitals. These are people that were born without a hand. So day to day, they have very similar challenges as the acquired amputees, but they don't suffer from phantom sensations and pain. I'm going to show you the results on these caricatures of the brain. You probably know that, but the brain is basically one gigantic sheet. And it's a very clever evolutionary solution to fit this sheet into our head by squishing it into kind of paper mache. So it's great for us walking around with our gigantic sheet of brain, but it's a terrible solution if you're a neuroscientist trying to show your results to other people, because half of the interesting stuff is happening inside. If I just showed you the brain from the outside, you won't be able to see it. So what we do is we inflate the brain like a balloon, and everything that used to be inside in the depth, I'm color coding in this darker color, and anything that was exposed in the surface, I'm color coding with a lighter shade. It doesn't really matter if you're not obsessed with which brain area is what, but it's just to explain to you why my brains are going to look weird. And I've superimposed here representations of different body parts as I see them in control participants. So this is my version of the famous homunculus, where you can see the representation of the feet here in green, which are in the middle between the two hemispheres. Here we have, the representation of the arms, here in blue, and below it we can see the hand area, which is the area we're going to focus on today. And as you can see, some of the hand area overlaps with the arm area, especially in the motor cortex. It means that some neurons are not too fussy, upper limb is upper limb, but many neurons are very particular about what information they're going to process. And this is the hand area. And over here in the bottom, we can see the representation of the face that, as you've seen from the textbook, appears to be quite relevant to what happens to amputees. So, previous people really focused on representations of the face to try to understand what happens in the brains of amputees, and this is because the face are the cortical neighbors of the hand. But given that amputees have this incredible phenomena that they can feel the hand that is no longer there, I thought it would be interesting and useful to try and study the representation of the hand, the missing hand of amputees, instead of their face. And if you talk to amputees, you very quickly realize that some of the sensations they feel are what we call kinesthetic sensations, meaning they can feel their hand moving. And what we've learned is that if you ask someone to move the hand that is no longer there, they report that they can feel like it's actually moving. So let me show you what happens when an amputee moves their phantom hand. And what I'm going to show you is what happens to the muscles in the muscles that normally control the hand, but the hand itself is actually physically absent. And this is a recording, so you'll have to look at the trace behind the screen while he's being asked, the amputee, to move his phantom fingers one after the other in a cycle.
Okay, so real finger tapping, go.
This is the trace, and as you can see, he's counting the cycle.
2, 3.
And you can also look at the muscles themselves. We don't really need to record because the effects are so big. What we basically see is that with each of the movements that the amputee is attempting to perform with the phantom hand, there's very clear burst of activity in the muscle, meaning that when we're asking them to move their phantom hands, they're not imagining to move their phantom hands. They're actually sending a signal from the brain to the muscles to do something, okay? So with that, we can stick amputees in the fMRI scanner and try to see what happens in their brain. And this is a participant when he's asked to move his intact hand. And as you can see, there's this nice burst of activity that we can see in this traditional hand knob. Now we're going to ask him to move his phantom hand. We can't really see anything in the video because he's not having a hand to move. But as you can see in the brain, there's very clear activity that we can see in the brain in the opposite hemisphere to the missing hand in this traditional hand knob. And we ran this experiment, very simple experiment, where we just asked people to move their phantom hands. And these are results of individual participants in one study. We've done it many times since. And what you can see here is that each and every one of our participants, with the exception of one, was able to engage quite specifically this area, the hand area. And these are representations of the phantom hands compared to when they're moving their toes. So it's body part specific, as you've seen in the homunculus before. So it basically means that even though the hand is physically not there, the brain retains signals that relate to activity of the hand. So there's something lingering in the brains of these people, which we actually found to relate to phantom pain. So here I'm showing you activity, meaning that when they're moving their phantom hands, some regions in this brain are becoming activated. The next question we wanted to ask is how organized, how normal this representation is. And the nice thing about the brain areas that I'm interested in is that they're very organized. I've shown you before that there's a very order layout of different body parts, one after the other in the brain. If we would look at the hand area, we know at least from animal literature that there's very nice layout, fine grain of the fingers themselves. And with a very fancy, very expensive and very big and powerful scanner that we have in Oxford University, we can actually achieve resolution, spatial resolution in the brains of humans, allowing us to look at the level of representation of individual fingers. This is one of my students in our actually pilot study. So she's lying in the scanner and she's just moving her fingers one after the other. And we're using a technique here that we call traveling wave. And as you can see, as she's switching from one finger to another, there's this propagating wave of activity that is just moving along this hand area, meaning that with each finger there's a different sub-region that shows stronger activity. We can color code this, resulting in these very colorful maps showing us which regions show selectivity for each of the fingers. Now, this is a tiny map, it's about 2 centimeters, but still you can see very clearly representation of the thumb, the index finger, the middle finger, the ring finger, and a tiny bit of pinky here in pink. We have shown that this is a very, very reliable approach, allowing you to look at individual participants. So here are 3 participants. This is me, the prettiest. And as you can see, each of us is showing very similar order of the fingers, index, middle, ring, pinky, in the same place. This is at the, never mind, in the somatosensory cortex. And as you can see, we were being scanned over and over again over the course of a month, and we were all showing that the unique details of each of the map are preserved very, very specifically. And all I want to show you here is that this technique is good enough to capture differences between participants, but also that different people have quite different maps. So with that in mind, I want to play a little game with you, which I call, which is the phantom hand map? I'm going to show you two maps. I'm going to walk you through it. One of them belongs to Chris. Chris lost his arm to a motorcycle accident 25 years ago. The second map belongs to a control participant. He was so unremarkable I can't even remember who he was, okay? So I'll walk you through the maps, and then we'll take some votes and we'll see if you can figure out which map belongs to the hand that is not there. So here we have map number 1. We can see nicely the representation of the thumb, the index in the middle, the ring, and the pinky. But the map is a bit disorganized, it's a bit messy, and you can see the thumb representation wrapping around, so we have a double representation of the thumb. And the area, I should say, is always the somatosensory cortex, not the motor cortex. So it's the area that normally receives touch from the hand, not the area that sends information to move the hand. Here we have another map. Here we have very clear, very crisp representation of the thumb, the index, the middle, and the ring. Not so much the pinky. We're using very stringent criteria here for thresholding, so we can't really see the pinky here, but it is there, hidden. So very clear, very crisp map, but a bit washed up. So raise your arm if you think that the messy map belongs to Chris's missing hand. Okay? And who thinks the washed up map belongs to Chris? Oh, you guys are pretty good at it. Okay. So this was Chris's map, and you're right, it's a bit washed up. It's not as strong as we normally see in other participants, but the detail is still there, right? So the fingers are still there, and we can separate them one from the other, even though the guy has not had a hand in 25 years. Let me show you another map. So this map belongs to Mike. Mike has a high level of amputation, so he doesn't have any of the muscles that normally control the hand. He lost his hand 37 years ago due to a farming accident. And I'm going to show you two maps. They both belong to Mike. One belongs to his intact hand. This is the hand that he relies on predominantly in daily life and has been relying on for the last 3 decades. The second map belongs to the hand that is missing, okay? So I'll walk you through. So these two opposite hemispheres, so they're going to look slightly bit different. But here again, we can see this is the sensory cortex. And we can kind of see two maps here with the thumb, the index, middle, ring, and a nice fat pinky here. Here's another one. So this is again the somatosensory cortex. We have two maps, one here, one here. And you can nicely see the thumb, the index, the middle, the ring, and the pinky, okay? So raise your arm if this one belongs to the missing hand. Okay? And who thinks this one belongs to the missing hand? Okay, I don't know how you guys are doing it. I've test-proofed this over like 20 lectures, and you're not supposed to get it. It's supposed to be fun. Well, what I normally say at this point is don't feel bad if you don't get it. But now I'm thinking maybe I should hire a few of you to my lab. We've run a lot of stats to try and see if a computer can decode, can differentiate between the representation of the control participants compared to the missing hand. And there are some subtle features like activity level that can kind of give it away, but anything to do with the organization is indistinguishable. So we can't find differences between the organization of a perfectly healthy hand and the organization of a hand that has been missing for decades. And this is surprising, not only because there was no hand to move around in the scanner while they were taking these scans, but particularly because this hand hasn't been used, hasn't been receiving organized inputs to this sensory area in decades. But still it is there, it is latent, but it's constantly there, and it just never leaves the brain. It's not being wiped out like we thought based on previous research. So this is about the hand. Do you guys remember the lips? What about the lips? Can we find lips in this area? We've run a few studies. I'm just going to show you a quick summary slide where we were looking at where exactly in the brain can we find representation of the lips. And we've done it in a group of amputees in orange and controls in purple. And I hope you can see quite clearly that there is a tiny bit of shift, so the amputees are slightly shifted in their lip representation compared to the controls. But this shift is very, very local. The hand area is so far away, you can't even see it in this insert. It's all the way over here. So it would be somewhere like here. And with any measurement I've ever taken, I was never able to find any signs of representation of the lower face inside the hand area. On the margin, yes, but not inside. Meaning the representation is maintained for the hand and not invaded by the face. So this discovery that the representation of the hand is constantly persistent in the hand, in the brain, actually provided us with new opportunities to come up with potential treatments for phantom pain. And I just want to show you a treatment that we haven't published yet, but we're very excited about. And it's cool in many ways, but the way that you would like is that it involves non-invasive brain stimulation. So what we do is we're actually stimulating the brains of people by passing current through 2 electrodes. And while we're passing this current, we're asking people to move their phantom hands. And we want them to move their phantom hands because we want them to engage with their motor cortex, somatosensory cortex, and the entire sensory motor system. And we are running this study under 3 conditions. The first condition we call sham. It basically means that we are pretending to stimulate them. But I'll be clear, I'm pretending to stimulate them because Sana and Melvin, which are the students who actually ran the study, have no clue what's going on. So they know that some treatments are going to be real and some treatments are going to be fake, but there's no way for them to know which is what. And this is really important when we study pain because we know that the experimenters' beliefs and expectations can really affect the treatment. This is called the placebo effect. So one condition would be a lie condition. In another condition, in the treatment condition, we're actually going to run current through their brains, and this is excitatory current, targeting the territory of the missing hand. In the third condition, we're just going to stimulate the wrong brain area, just to see how specific the effects are. And what we find is that just an hour and a half after this procedure, if we look at the 2 control conditions, the relative pain compared to when they started the study is slightly increased. And the reason it is increased is because they've been moving their phantom hands for 20 minutes. And we know that that tends to exacerbate phantom pain. But when they were receiving the real treatment, the excitatory brain stimulation, they're actually reporting to feel better than they did when they started the session. And next time we meet them is the following week, and this is when they're coming to receive a new treatment. And what we find is that a week after this single session of brain stimulation, they're still feeling better. And we were lucky enough to keep track with them through the course of the week. We were sending them text messages, asking them to let us know how they're feeling. And these are their average pain ratings. And as you can see, in the day or 2 following the treatment, this is the sham condition versus the treatment condition. So in the first few days, they're feeling better. I mean, you know, they came to Oxford University, they got their brain stimulated, they got to hang with these guys. Who wouldn't feel better? But the Sana and Melvin effect is not long-lasting. So a few days in, they're starting going back to their baseline pain levels. Not in the treatment condition. In the treatment condition, they go down and they stay down. So we have significant results for pain relief lasting on a scale of a week, which is quite incredible, and I should be forthcoming and say was not expected. So to summarize so far, textbooks teach us that if you lose the input to the brain area responsible for the hand, this is going to spontaneously trigger a process of reorganization where other body parts, such as the face, are going to take over the hand area, and this is going to be terrible, give you phantom pain. And if you want to treat phantom pain, what you need to do is go to the doctor, ask the doctor to give you a mirror, and through this mirror you're going to feel better. Not really. I mean, by now we have quite a few meta-analyses showing that this treatment, unfortunately, is not effective for treating phantom pain. But it is still the preliminary treatment that is given by clinics all across the world. What we find is that there is plenty of representation of the missing hand persisting in the brain, and it is there preserved with exquisite detail. So we don't have to worry about putting in the representation back in the brain. What we need to worry about is how this persistent representation interacts with, communicates, synchronizes with the rest of the sensory motor system. And if we use brain stimulation, we can actually relieve pain by changing or reinstating the entire area back into its original network. So how can I explain the fact that in none of my studies have I ever been able to find representation of the lower part of the face or the lips into the hand area? Ask any monkey researcher, they would promise you they have seen it, they have heard the neurons crackle in their apparatus. There's definitely representation of the face in the hand area of monkeys. How can we explain these differences? Well, I was thinking, you know, the monkeys in this study in particular have been kept with pretty much an amputation for about 10 years. In that time, they had to be monkeys, right? They had to feed themselves, they had to climb, they had to do the things that monkeys like to do. And monkeys actually tend to use their mouth a lot as effectors, you know, in order to grab, in order to hold things, in order to manipulate. So I was thinking maybe the difference between monkeys and humans is that monkeys use their mouth to compensate for their disability, and humans, at least acquired amputees, don't tend to do that so much. So unfortunately, I don't have the tools to observe monkeys that have been amputated, but what I can do is look at amputees, and we actually spend a lot of time looking at amputees in my lab. And here is just one really simple challenge. How do you open a bottle of water if you're missing one hand? The person here is going to use his torso and arm in order to hold the bottle. The person here has a myoelectric prosthesis, so he's actually sending signals to the muscles of his arm in order to operate the prosthesis. This person has a prosthesis, but this prosthesis wouldn't really help him much to do something like holding a bottle of water. So instead he's choosing to use his legs. And this person up here is just opening the bottle with his mouth, which, as you can see, is quite effective. So there's a huge wealth of strategies, compensatory strategies, that people adopt spontaneously. No one really shows them how to open a bottle of water. They just have to try it and see what works for them. And we wanted to capture some of this wealth and see if these differing strategies affect brain organization and reorganization in any way. So in the study I'm going to show you next, we were focusing on the upper limbs, and to understand how people carry these quite complex compensatory strategies, we simply looked at how much they move around their arms in daily life. So we gave them this set of watches that are sensitive for accelerations, they're accelerometers. We asked them to go home, do whatever it is that they like doing, and while they were doing these things, we could just see how much they're moving their limbs. And a very, very simple output that we could get from this measurement is how much they tend to rely on their intact hand above and beyond the residual arm, so how lateralized their behavior is. And as you can see, the amputees, the acquired amputees, the people we were talking about so far, actually have very strong lateralization. They have one hand remaining, they've always used it as a hand, they know how to use it as a hand, they're going to just use it a lot more. The congenitals, these are the people that were born without a hand, are actually quite good at kind of incorporating their residual arm in daily tasks. So they exhibit behavior that is more bimanual, more similar to the way we behave. Based on these differing changes, we can make some predictions about brain reorganization. If I'm true with my predictions about monkeys using the hand area because they just rely on their mouth more, we would expect that in these people, whichever body part is being used to compensate for the disability more would potentially benefit from better brain representation, and maybe even in the missing hand area. So that would be the residual arm in people that were born without a hand, and the intact hand in the acquired amputees. So here we just ask all of the participants to carry very simple movements like that in the scanner, so we can see how their arm looks like in their brains. And we're asking, in the entire brain, which areas are activated more when the congenitals move their arms compared to the acquired amputees, and also compared to control participants. And from the entire cortex, there's only one area that lights up that you can see here in orange. And I've overlaid it with the sensory motor homunculus to make it easy for you to see where it is. And as you can see, it falls bang into the hand area. So this would be the arm area. And in the arm area, there's no differences, meaning the representation of the arm in the arm area is normal in congenital amputees, people that were born without a hand. But when we look at this area that is dedicated to hand representation, this is the place where if they were born with a hand, the hand would be represented. This area gets taken over by the residual arm. And this is happening in the congenitals, but not the acquired amputees. So could it be because acquired amputees don't use the residual arm so much? To answer that, we ran another experiment where we asked everyone to move their intact hand in the scanner, or the dominant hand in controls. And again, we asked, in the entire brain, is there an area that is more responsive to hands, the intact hand, in the acquired group compared to the other two groups? And again, from the entire cortex, there is one cluster. And as you can see, it really beautifully overlaps with the area that likes hands. I couldn't have photoshopped it better myself. But the important thing to notice is which of the two hand areas it is. So the intact hand is normally represented in the intact hand hemisphere, which is all the way in the other side. And here we didn't find any differences. So hand processing is completely normal and similar across the groups when it comes to the normal hand area. But in the acquired amputees, the hand area that is now not used by the phantom hand, at least doesn't receive external inputs from the missing hand, now gets recruited to actually support representation of the hand that is being used too much. And this is exciting because, first of all, it means that reorganization is a thing, and it actually happens in adults. And it's happening in a very striking way because the ability for this input to get all the way here is much more complex, much more demanding than the ability of this brain area to get into here. So it means that plasticity is possible and robust. But it seems that plasticity is guided by how we use our body, how we behave in daily life, and not just passively or spontaneously due to changes in input. So a change in input is not enough. You need to regulate it by change in behavior. So to summarize so far, the representation of the area of the missing hand does not represent the face in humans. Instead we see a lot of representation of the missing hand that is still there, but also new representation of body parts that are used for compensatory purposes, which leads me to the final question, which is, what about prosthetics, right? Artificial limbs, because they are used to compensate for the disability. They are used in a similar way that you would use a hand. So could these brain areas be used in order to represent an artificial limb? So before I show you my findings, I just want to clarify some misgivings about prosthetic limbs, because I bet every single person here in the audience is thinking about someone like Stephen. So I'll show you a quick clip of how Stephen uses his hand.
You seem to have a really good range of movement with it as well.
Oh, the movement's fantastic. I mean, I can take your hand and it will not hurt you. People think it will hurt them, and it won't.
Like most people, I take my hands and the things they can do for granted. But for someone like Stephen, who's lost a limb, a bionic hand is invaluable.
Grapes. You lift the grape out, it will not squash. It then go squash a grape. It won't squash, it just holds it, and it's perfect.
So it's all those simple everyday things that we take so much for granted that this technology is now allowing you to do.
Yeah. confidence has literally gone through the roof. I would attend schools and talk to kids about it and show them how it works and why it works, and that's taken a big stigma away from the whole fact that I wore prosthetic. The kids absolutely love it.
Stephen's hand.
So I hope Stephen wouldn't mind me saying this on the record, but he's just showing off. I mean, he wouldn't really use his bionic arm to hold a knife, but the fact is, if he wants to show off, he can, which is really incredible because his ability to manipulate his artificial limb is outstanding. And it's outstanding not only in the sense that it's really good, but also in the sense that most people can't do that. So I call Stephen a super user, and I want to show you how more typical amputees deal with using a prosthesis. So prostheses come in different shapes and forms, and the one common goal for all prostheses is to supplement hand function. So some of them may look like a hand, other won't. Some of them are operable, other not. And I want to show you how different participants use these different prostheses. So here is one participant. He has to sharpen a pencil, and he's using a myoelectric prosthesis, the one that is powered for the muscles. And as you can see, he's actually really struggling to hold the sharpener steady. It's actually quite an ordeal for him to keep it steady. Here's a traditional hook. So this is powered by the body, and hooks are actually fantastic for holding and grasping small objects, so we can carry this task quite easily. But as you can see, this hook doesn't look like a hand and is not really operated similarly to the way we would hold a sharpener. Now here's a lady who uses what we call a cosmetic prosthesis. Based on the manufacturer, this is just to give you a look as if your hand is still there. But look how well she can carry the same task. So she's faster, she's better, and she's less awkward than the other guys. So the point I want to make with this is that it is not really up to the manufacturers or the designers how functional a prosthesis is and how a prosthesis is going to be used in daily life. It is really up to the users to figure out how to use it and how to make most of it. So in that in mind, that there's very different prostheses out there and are used very differently, we wanted to see how prostheses are represented in the brain, and specifically we wanted to see if people that use their prostheses more in daily life can actually benefit more from brain resources that are traditionally dedicated for the body. So this study actually involved several brain areas. So we're going to look at the sensory motor hand area that by now I know you all know and love. But I'd like to introduce another hand area in the brain. This is an area that we find in the visual cortex. And in this area, we find there's very similar selectivity to specific body parts as we've seen in the sensory motor cortex. But this is for seen body parts. So the yellow area here, it is present in both sides of the brain, so it's not selective to one of the two representations. But this area would respond more, would be more active when you show a participant a picture of a hand or an arm compared to pictures of other body parts or compared to other objects. So first thing we wanted to see is how these two brain areas talk to each other. So we have the hand area, the missing hand area in the sensory motor cortex, and we have these visual hand areas that we know that respond strongly to hands. And we wanted to know if communication between these two hand areas is disrupted through amputation and how it is facilitated by prosthesis usage. And not surprisingly, people that only have one hand show disruptions in communication between the two hand areas. I mean, why should these areas talk if the hand area doesn't receive similar input to the visual hand area? What we find that is interesting is that the amount of connectivity between these two areas heavily depends on how much you use a prosthesis. So those people who use a prosthesis a lot in daily life, constantly, actually show normal levels of communication between the visual and the motor cortex. It is only those people who don't really use a prosthesis in daily life that show the drastic reductions. So if these areas are talking more, if you use a prosthesis, can we really find activity in these areas relating to prosthesis? Can we find representation? So this is a very simple visual study where we just show people pictures while they're lying in the scanner. And these pictures could be pictures of hands, they could be pictures of prosthesis, and we can also show them a picture of their own prosthesis. And what we find is in that visual hand area, the area of the brain that is selective for visual representation of upper limbs, those amputees who use the prosthesis a lot in daily life would show stronger representation for pictures of prosthesis. And yes, this is true when we show them their own prosthesis, but it is also true when we show them these very generic pictures of prosthesis, which don't even look like a hand. So it seems that if you use a prosthesis a lot in daily life, you will be able to take advantage of resources that have been, through evolution, specialized in representing the body. Again, providing opportunities for adaptive reorganization. So to summarize my talk today, so the question I presented to you is how flexible is the representation of the body in the adult brain? And what we found is that the freed up brain can actually not support the face as we thought based on textbook and animal research. Instead, there's a lot of maintained representation of the missing hand, and this is actually a very important fact if you think about new generation prostheses that rely on recording and stimulating information directly from the brain, because if you want someone to feel like the hand is being touched, all you have to do is go to this area and stimulate it. And the sensation would be of the hand. It's not going to be on the face, or it's not going to be of a different body part, because there's enough persistent organization in that area to let the rest of the brain decode it as sensation coming from the missing hand. So that's a useful piece of information. We also found that different body parts can benefit from increased representation in this area. I've only shown you 2 examples, but we actually extended this in further research to show that basically whichever body part you're using to rely on for being more efficient in daily life would actually benefit from this brain area. And finally, most recently, we find that maybe not exactly this area, but other brain areas that are dedicated for body representation could be taken over in order to represent artificial limbs, so long as you use your artificial limb in an efficient way to supplement for hand function. So this is the talk, this is my group. The work has been done exclusively in Oxford. We have moved to UCL last month, and we're excited to be a part of the greater community of London. That's it, thank you.